Hello, it's Jennifer. Today is February 20th. It's a Tuesday. Today I'm going to make quite a lengthy video about tomatoes. So this is specifically about growing tomatoes last year, what I learned from it, and what I intend to do this year. So going over last year, I'll start with some of my successes. So last year I had success growing heirloom tomatoes, Brandywine, Black Truffle, and San Marzano. I had success growing hybrids, Patio Princess, Bush Steak, one Big Mama plant, and Baby Boomer. I did not have success growing the Patio Princess and Baby Boomer in my backyard, but they were successfully grown in my front yard, and I have yet to figure out what the difference is. Plants that produced okay for me, that means that the plants were okay, and I had low yields, would be Black Cherry, which I had success with in 2016 but not in 2017, Yellow Pear, Green Gage, Speckled Roman, Black Creme, Cherokee, and Less of Sweet Japanese. So I did have an improvement with Less of Sweet Japanese. When I grew this in 2016, I was unable to get a healthy plant that had lots of foliage, and I only got 1 to 2 tomatoes per plant. Now the list of failures is pretty long, and these are mostly hybrids. So the Power Pops, the Baby Boomer did not work in my backyard. Rio Grande, Ensalada, Fresh Salsa, Mar Globe, Anahu, Supremo, Wagner Blue Green, the Silvery Fir, Super Sauce, Big Mama, and Gladiator. And I do want to make a comment about these hybrid sauce tomatoes that are supposed to be huge, and you can make, an entire jar of sauce off of one tomato. What I found is the few tomatoes that I did get were indeed big, but they were all watery and were not useful for making sauces unless I boiled them down, at which point I had to add other tomatoes, because once you boil them down to a consistency where it's sauce-like and it tastes like sauce, you've pretty much boiled off most of the water. So some of the problems I had last year were nematodes in the tomatoes that I planted in ground. So that seems to be a condition of the soil where it may be too wet, too acidic, and it just becomes a breeding ground for nematodes. And what that looks like is that the plants, they grow normally, but then when they reach a certain point, the growth starts to get stunted and it looks like your plant is miniaturizing. And then when I pulled the plants up to remove them, I noticed nodules and a lumpy thickening of the roots. And when I looked it up on the internet, it said those are the indications of nematodes, and that those nodules and the thickening of the roots was an inflammatory response to nematode attack. So what I did, because I was trying to go with the least expensive method of dealing with these nematodes, was to overwinter the soil with some shrimp meal. And I put this shrimp meal in the soil, I believe, in November. And supposedly the shrimp meal is supposed to attract bacteria that will attack the nematodes. So I did that. It smelled like SeaWorld for about 2 weeks in my backyard with this shrimp meal. So hopefully that works. If not, then I will have to get some of that nematode treatment spray, and unfortunately that stuff runs $40 to $50. Another problem I had was too much shade. So in 2016, I found that my tomatoes were suffering because they were overheating and getting too much UV. So in 2017, I went ahead and tried some shading methods. and one of the ones with the shade cloth that was on at all times was just too much shade. And so basically I overcompensated for the problem, and what ended up happening is that my plants were tall and spindly. They didn't have much foliage, and they didn't produce well, if they produced at all. Also, the fruits were extremely bitter and acidy. You know, they tasted like sucking on a sour lemon. It was pretty awful. The other problem I had was powdery mildew, and this was despite using the single stem method on the tomatoes. That didn't seem to make a difference from the previous year when I didn't know that I needed to prune my tomatoes. I won't be doing single stem method this year. I will go ahead and let the tomatoes grow, and I will prune them when they start to get unruly, rather than, you know, pruning them to get all the suckers and this, that, and the other. It seems that the tomatoes actually need their leaves to produce fruit, to keep the fruit covered and cool, to prevent sun scald. And I think compared to the year before, the plant's just overall healthier when you allow it to do its thing. So other mistakes that I made last year were growing indeterminate plants in too small of grow bags. And basically this just became a problem of I couldn't properly stake the plants because there wasn't enough dirt to support proper staking, and then water management. So one of the things with the grow bags is that they evaporate from all sides, not just from the top, like if you plant in a clay or a plastic pot. So you need to keep those moist in order to keep the plant well watered. And so that was something that I struggled with. So good things that happened last year, or that I implemented, were the tomato planters. And those were these planters here that are raised beds, but they are pretty much, they're raised beds over in ground, so there's no gopher cage underneath, so the plant roots can go and spread as deep and far as they need to get water. And then the trellis cage above provides shading, but not too much shading. And then what we found is as the indeterminate plants grew up, they went through the trellis and continued using that trellis as support, so I didn't have to worry about cutting them back or pruning once they had reached the top of the trellis box, which is about 6 feet. The other thing that happened with these, in particular with these tomato boxes, is that I thoroughly mulched the plants, and that seemed to help control the soil temperature both during the summer and during cold periods. I also installed drip irrigation, and that helped a lot with cutting down time for watering, since I wasn't hand watering anymore. And then, this is not something I did, but Mother Nature provided me with a whole bunch of birds in my backyard to manage the worms. So I didn't have very many worm problems, either with the tomato worms or with the cabbage loopers or whatnot, because I had a healthy bird population back here that was keeping them down and eating them. They also eat the grubs and the earthworms too, but I have so many earthworms that it's not a problem. So some of the measures that I will take this year, hopefully to improve over last year, is I will only use shading when the temperature rises above 95 degrees. I will mulch all of the plants, so that's going to require a lot of mulch. So I'm waiting for a mulch sale at either Home Depot or Lowe's. I will continue refining my watering schedule, so I haven't quite got the drip irrigation scheduled down yet for each individual plant, the plant type. So some things are getting waterlogged, some things are not, and I still have a mix match because there are still 2 sprinkler heads in my yard, and they are putting out much more water than the drip irrigation, so part of my yard is getting flooded still. I'm not doing square foot gardening this year, so that's just not something for me. What I found is that it caused a mess with the tomatoes, and trying to manage the number of tomatoes and then trying to prune all those suckers and then trying to manage the powdery mildew and everything. It was too much, and I don't believe I saw any benefit from it. Certainly I did not get more vegetables from it because the losses were so high, and it's just not a good look. So what I've decided to do is to do the plant spacing based upon how I know the plant grows. So this year I've got my tomatoes spaced probably about 18 inches to 2 feet, depending upon the variety. And this year, instead of using the single stem method that's required for square foot gardening, I went back to the tomato cages. This time the difference is as I pounded the tomato cages into the ground, such that they are more firmly into the ground, and hopefully there'll be better support for the tomatoes. And then along with having the tomato boxes to support the vines as they grow beyond the cage and up into the trellis. So hopefully that'll work. I will be reporting on that as my tomatoes grow. And the other thing that I'm trying is some alternative staking for the tomato plants that are not necessarily in the tomato cages, and some of them that are in the larger 15-gallon plastic buckets and the 25-gallon grow bags.